We're live.
And we're live. All right, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out to the UFID May meeting to try and talk about a few things. Today, we're going to talk about how to deal with our time zone issues, touch on slicer integration, vendor adoption, how to address resins and powders, something that the community has brought up, and then talk about some new filaments that have come out, Richard Horn's proposed spool post, and hopefully if anybody has heard back from any of the E3D guys, we'll hopefully talk about how they're using UFID in their production process. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with the whole EU integration. I think I'm personally willing to, either stay up late or get up early in the morning to have a quick, UFID meeting with the people that are in the EU. I'm totally fine with doing that. But I just think that we either need to say we're going to do EU specific and a US time zone specific one and just move forward and just say whatever, we'll just keep the two groups going. Or we can keep trying to either say whoever wants to come to the meeting, can, we'll just, go 1 month, we'll do it so it's nice for them, 1 month it'll do it nice for us.
Yeah, I think the every other month would probably be beneficial, or even every third month and do one that's a convenient time for China. Because I know if we get people from China, but every other month for sure would be a reasonable time frame.
What is convenient? What are we defining as convenient time here for that time frame?
Well, I think what we probably want to do is talk to like Marcin and the other people who express interest who are across the water and ask them, because even the EU, they're going to have their own schedules. Like we can't do it. So some of them doing it in the middle of the workday might work for them, but for some other people, they might not be able to do it during the day. So, does anybody want to kind of reach out and figure out what would be the best time for them so we can start alternating?
I think after after this meeting, we should put something on the community page and just ask for input about when our EU friends would like to join us, because we can make a decision as the
US guys.
US guys that 3 o'clock in the morning is a perfect time for EU, but I don't think.
All right. Well. Okay.
It just in case you're watching this later, check the page, look for the post. We'll put it up there. Make sure you comment. Otherwise, it's going to continue to be inconvenient.
Okay. So, anyone feel like we need to keep talking about this?
No, I just wanted it in the video at some point.
Okay. Just double checking. All right. So, slicer integration. Has anybody been working on slicer integrations?
I've been MIA for a few months.
Okay, that's fine. I've been kind of MIA too. All right, looks like David just joined. David, just so you know, we are recording and broadcasting. So we're talking right now about slicer integration. So we've talked about this in the past. Does anybody? Okay, so what it boils down to is I've been looking at this again, and I actually think that probably the best thing to do is for me to write something for Octoprint that takes a QR code, can scan a QR code, and then it uses that to configure the slicing stuff that I put into Octoprint that works with Cura and Slicer.
Because currently, just so everybody who's here is on the same page, the workflow is that if you scan the QR code, it'll take you to the web page. The web page will have a few slicers. The slicer profiles that you can click on. It'll download the ini file. You get the ini file, push it to your slicer, and that's the end of where it's at currently. We don't have any. I don't have any idea of what we should do beyond that. Whatever. We could talk about some other ways to do it in the page itself. But unless somebody is involved with the slicer or Cura implementation and wants to put a barcode reader in one of those.
Well, the nice thing is Cura, so like putting it into Cura, like we could do that. I can't I don't have the expertise to put it into Slicer because Slicer is Perl and Cura is Python. So at least the UI stuff, right?
I've worked on Slicer before in Perl. I can if need be. I was just thinking something to make this a bit simpler is to essentially take like, you know, a bitly basically, do a smaller human interval code. So for now, we can just enter a code that looks at the UFID org website, finds out exactly what it is, and then so.
But yeah, we can do a. I don't know how. For everybody who haven't talked to in the past, I'm an RF engineer who started the web part for this because somebody needed to. So I'm not the best programmer. The current implementation. So you're saying that if we had a extension for either Slicer or Cura that would go out and search for the browser that has UFID open and pull down the config file from there?
Well, not even just that. It could be as simple as UFID linking it. I don't know how you do the hash. What is your current bit length for the data on average?
You mean like what we do, the current number of bits that we have?
Yeah.
It's it's not terrifically long.
Well, because the reason I ask is because you could do a type of hashing with low collision rate, but not obviously something as large as MD5. I'm thinking maybe 7 to 10 characters.
I know that that Cura actually has a bit string that you can pass it off the clipboard. I was looking into building that, but I hadn't gotten around to actually understanding it. We had talked about it at one point, but there is one that you can pass on the clipboard. We'll need to do some research on it.
And we really don't want to depend on the website if we don't have to.
Well, that's why I was saying a type of hash as opposed to just...
Oh, but hashes aren't reversible, so we have to look that up.
Yeah, I think that... so there's a couple options. So, like, if we had, you know, Slicer, like, Cura could basically have something that, you know, can access the webcam. I can't remember if they're using the Qt toolkit or not. But whatever, they access the webcam, and then we just use, you know, a QR library to parse that out and generate and we just have something that generates the config file from there. You know, that's how we could do that. I think it might be... I don't know, it might be easier. It's easier for me to put it in Octoprint because I'm more familiar with that code base. I'm just saying that of the people that we have now, or we can... I haven't really gotten very much of a response back from either Alessandro or Dade about that. So if we wanted to, I could try to get in touch with the Ultimaker people again.
Yeah, I think at this point though, until we get more market saturation, it's going to be a hard sell to get people to build it into their slicer. And I realize that's kind of a
chicken and the egg problem.
But we're getting there. We're getting somewhere with. We're getting a little bit closer every time that we move.
Well, and that's why I was thinking Octoprint would be a good middle ground because it would be. At least it would get some more, you know, value add for the vendors. You know, hey, look.
You can do. I think that I posted a long time ago the ZBar library. I don't know how that works with Python, but it's supposed to.
Yeah, I mean there's just the C library and there's Python bindings if I'm remembering. Yeah, I was basically looking at doing ZBar, use something to grab a snapshot from the webcam, throw it back down to the Raspberry Pi or whatever, and do ZBar on it, and then, you know, move on from there.
Out of curiosity, is there any reason, or you want to do it through the web interface? You don't want to do it through the onboard PyCam that goes outward?
Well, it's kind of a toss-up because I mean what we've talked about is we want people to be able to basically hold up, you know, the thing to their webcam and then it takes it. Yeah. So unfortunately, I mean, like we either can say, look, it'll work. We could do something that just works with a Raspberry Pi camera. There's lots of people that have those. It would be nicer if there was a way to do it also where someone could hit the website.
I remember that you were saying that the web UI version is quite terrible, quite difficult.
No, it uses stuff that I'm not familiar with, and I'm not a JavaScript person, so that's why it's more difficult for me to do the UI stuff in Octoprint. But it's not like I haven't hacked into it before, so.
Okay.
I just feel like I haven't gotten anywhere with the Cura and the slicer itself being integrated, and so that was the next thing in my mind was to do something with Octoprint.
Yeah.
Because this kind of comes down to who's willing to actually put in some pain to do this. So,
yeah. I have been talking to both Alessandro and Dade, not specifically about getting barcode reading built into the slicers, but laying groundwork in getting features implemented that we will need down the road.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Which is also the approach I'm taking on firmware. Instead of getting the EEPROM reading in there now, I'm trying to find all the little smaller features that can be implemented now that will be useful now and will be needed later on, rather than trying to do everything at once.
Oh, like the volumetric extrusion stuff and whatever else.
Yeah, exactly.
So are you doing any other firmware besides Marlin?
I'm mostly working on Marlin right now. It doesn't. I know there are other firmwares. That's the one that I'm most familiar with, obviously, and just having a reference implementation in one place will help those features be ported to another.
Yeah.
So I've also looked a little bit at SmoothieWare. I haven't really gotten into the code yet, but that's the next place I'm looking.
Yeah, the Smoothie board is pretty nice. I talked to those guys on IRC a bit. They used a hack. I think they might still be using a hacked web embedded control thing that I wrote, but I don't know.
Well, I've got the hardware for that, so I can play around with that too.
Cool. All right, so we're doing some firmware stuff, and so basically, I mean, if the next time you talk with Dade or the next time you talk with Alessandro, just talk about the QR thing. I think it would be a really good way to get vendor adoption if we could say, look, these slicers use it, right?
Yeah, we got to find a way to get, if we want to get vendor adoption, we got to find a way to make a value add. And if we want to make a value add, we got to find a reason to get the value add.
Okay, how about this then, since I know Perl, I have to research it every time. Perl's not a fun language, in my opinion. Although Slicer's moving more to C++, and that I can do a little bit better. But I will look into adding like a command line option and maybe a window panel where you can enter the UFID code, because it's essentially exactly what's on the QR code, right? It's just the UFID URL right now.
Yeah, it's the after the hashtag in the barcode. That is the ASCII, or not the ASCII, the hex value for the UFID code. So
can someone post a link for the reference to that so we know the formatting?
Yes, absolutely. I was logging in so that I could look at some of that stuff as well.
Because if that's the case, it won't be this week or next week, because I've got a 4-hour class every day, which is in the morning as I'll get out. But I will look into adding just a command line option, and because that way you don't have to worry about parsing the ini file and merging them back together in Slicer's case.
Well, the ini file, if you open the ini file, it will automatically load it into Slicer. That does work. I use it actually at some points.
Does it overlay on your stuff though? Because like for example, I know BotQ at least calls it with specific config any, and there's no way to overlay that with a different one.
It will open as a new filament. Like in the slicer, they have different options for different filaments. It will add a new filament.
Right, but when you open it from command line, at least Slicer, I don't know about Kira, has no default, or it doesn't use your default as the default. It doesn't use the one in the GUI as the default, which means that all the other...
It just adds it to your library of filaments that you have right now. So like
right, which would
drop down, but
tune or remove machine-specific tuning is my issue.
Yeah. But,
yeah. So I mean, it basically creates a new entry, but
yeah, it doesn't really. It just creates a new entry in the library. That's exactly right.
All right. So Justin, you want to take a look at the Perl, see how hard that would be to add something into Slicer. I'll take a harder look at Octoprint, maybe start hacking on something. At least if I can get something that basically will do the decompression into the INI file, similar to what the website is doing basically, but make it maybe a library that can be used either by Cura or Octoprint. So I think that's what we'll do from there. So let me put that down.
Go ahead, throw BotQ in there if you will.
Yeah. So generic library that goes, QR code in some image format, into config, and maybe I'll try and make it somewhat generalizable so we can kind of either output a carrier config or output a slicer config, or just something that might. Basically, this is just going to be a light wrapper on ZBar.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And that way we can start messing with Cura. We can do Octoprint like BotQ. BotQ is mostly PHP stuff, but still BotQ. The PHP could call out. Okay.
I'm moving a lot of the slicer profile and abstracting it to the Python side. So what happens is that whenever you create a new profile or new version of the slicer, the site gets notified about it, and the clients can immediately download it.
Cool. All right. So,
Justin had something in the.
Justin, do you want to talk about print-to-peer right now, or did you want to talk about after this?
I mean, I figured you and I would talk about it because of the whole Octoprint thing. But I mean, I think we should probably, if we're talking about, because we do obviously talk about Octoprint and BotQ a lot, we should probably reach out to them. I've already emailed them, not specifically about UFID, but I've got their alpha software. Unfortunately, my printer died the day after, temporarily died. They always temporarily die. The day after he sent me the software, so I haven't had the chance to try it yet. But
yeah,
maybe we could reach out to them.
Yeah, Tom Bielecki, the CEO, I've talked to him once or twice, just exchanges through email. Yeah. But so I guess I can reach out to him and talk to him about it. Just to see their thing is kind of interesting because they have all their slicing stuff is external and closed source, so it's not something we can really help with. So
yes, but reaching out to them with that at least, because if you have some kind of standard that's usable, and I think we're throwing several different ideas up here like QR codes, and you've got the specification which I'm reading. It's actually well put together.
Yep. But there's also some they also have some scratch work done for doing the exact same implementation for struggling through figuring out how to handle SkyneForge, and I also have a for the makerware. I have the same. To do what we're doing for Slicer in the browser. I have a similar scratch work done for the other two. But if we have any other ones that actually use a text or any file or something else that is human readable, it's not a too far throw to make it download through the web browser.
I also messaged MakerBot about doing something similar, and they were basically like, no.
Whatever. Yeah. That's what I got too. I haven't been terrific. I messaged asking if specifically asking if using third-party filament was going to do anything for the warranty at this time or in the foreseeable future, because I didn't want to implement it if it was going to harm people's warranties. But they said no, it does not currently.
So we can, I mean, Miracle Grew, the core slicing engine that MakerBot uses behind all their other stuff, is open source. It does have JSON config files, so we could support it if we wanted to. You know, just to throw that out there, that we don't actually have to go through MakerBot.
That doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy to import those configurations, though.
No, it is not.
It's not. They don't really have a way to do it, but the people that are going to want to use other filament, most of them might go through the pain of copying over the JSON file.
Yeah, I looked into that. I did it for a friend who has a SplashForge one. I did it for him because he needed to add a new filament, but I don't know about the about doing it for everybody. If it's something that we need to put in like into our webpage.
I think we'll you know, since we can actually make, you know, actually do something about Slicer or Cure or the other ones that are more open, like we should try and focus on those ones, because we have very limited manpower right now, and until we get other people on board, we basically just need to go forward and, you know,
pick a path and walk it.
Yeah. You know, I think once we get some type of Slicer integration in, then suddenly that'll be when we start able to go to, you know, other people, other vendors, and be like, look, this is something that is just really simple to use. Put it into your system, and people can use your filament easier.
Yeah.
Or whatever. All right. So I think we've talked a lot about Slicer integration. So is there any final thoughts, or are we good?
Yeah. One thing real quick on Princip here, on their alpha software, I'm looking at their disk image again. I forgot they use GPX, I think it's called. Basically, it's a slicer to, or G-code to MakerBot standard, so it goes from the standard G-code of like Slicer and Cura and outputs it in the X3G format.
Mm-hmm.
So we could still do that to go from Slicer to, but then they have to configure Slicer, but as far as importing profile goes, since it doesn't overlay, you end up with the same type of effect.
Yeah, I've looked at a couple of different things that are supposedly go from G-code to, you know, S3G or whatever, but we can talk about that some more on the side. All right, so for vendor adoption right now, pretty much the only people that have come forward that they're starting to use this is E3D, which is great. And there's been some feedback from Joshua about it. Does anybody remember what he wrote, since I don't have it right in front of me?
Talking about there's a lot of effort into getting the background numbers for one QR code together. So, from what I was understanding is to go through, evaluate the filament, figure out your print temp, figure out your measurements and things like that. It's a huge amount of time, and that's where I think they were at, as why they haven't put it on all their filaments, because it takes a long time to slowly build it in. And they're trying to bring in as many strange types of filament as possible.
Yeah.
So, they don't know exactly how they're going to be able to handle it, is what I gathered out of their out of the post. But which can lead us, which leads me into the other topic that we didn't put on here of measurement standards and measurement standards and measurement methods. But I think that's something that we need to do as well.
Okay. So, at this point, I mean, for those of us that have connections with different vendors, do we feel like right now is a time to try and get vendors on board, or do we want to try and wait? I'm just curious at this point whether we want to try and reach out to, like, you know, like Justin's talked to some people at Lulzbot. Who's What's This is a vendor technically.
Well,
Like who else do we want to talk to?
there is. I was looking through some of the filaments because I've been getting more adventurous in my printing recently, and people that wouldn't have a terrific time implementing it, I don't think that, based upon the information they have on their website, they have Tauman, the nylon. They have most of the information in the standard already available on their website, so it wouldn't be a terrific jump for it to push it to there. But a lot of these people, it's going to be a fair bit of work without any measurement standards.
Okay.
Yeah, well, a lot of these, most of the filament at the manufacturer, they're actually technical data sheets. I've looked at some that have a lot of the information we're looking for. It's just a matter of going back to the person who actually produces the filament and finding those and inputting that information.
Yeah.
There are some things that aren't on there that we need.
Like print, which is a huge amount of time and that's a lot of. It's a fair bit of work. You have to put like half a kilogram, or not half a kilo, a few hundred grams of filament through your hot end before you're comfortable that your thermal profile is right, and then it changes from bot to bot.
Yeah, and I think that's the core of this is is the UFID something that's standard, and then you figure out your offset for your printer, and then you apply that? Because like because every piece of filament I have to basically print out a bunch of stuff to try and figure out what are the best printing characteristics of it, because the temperature is not always the same across everything. So with that being said, like I think that maybe we need to do figure out some measurements and standards, but I think that just having some of that information to get started with, the precision, it doesn't bother me at this point because it should get you within the ballpark.
But yeah, it's mainly, I would like to be able to get it within like 5 degrees or 5 to 10 plus or minus 5 degrees Celsius. That's what I really feel like at this point is attainable from printer to printer.
Yeah, that's why from the beginning I wanted to try to include information that's hard data about the filament, like glass transition temperature, and emphasize that more than suggested printing temperature, because printing temperature is going to be different on different machines. But if you have all the data there, then in theory you can calculate what offsets your machine is going to need and how it's going to react to it.
Yeah, the print, but for the print temperature, I really think we need to figure out a viscosity-based measurement system where we have a standard hot end and measure the force that we're putting it in, and then do a temperature curve, and at a given speed that we have determined, figure out how much filament, how much force is put on the extruder, and that might not necessarily be the best place to print at, but at least it'll be a place to start with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, sorry, go ahead.
If you can give a couple of numbers that describe that curve, then the firmware can reconstruct it and figure out where in the curve it usually needs to be.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to work on this summer, was building a measurement system that incorporates a couple of these parameters, and then just start putting random types of filament through it and see how it correlates to my particular bot's printing temperature, and basically just have a Bowden style extruder that is I use for every type of filament to measure with, get this curve, and then make a get the curve as you increase temperature what your viscosity does, and then start working with that. But
yeah, and we can design one rig that does several different measurements. There's a color meter, an opacity meter, and all kinds of things, and it runs a filament through that, and at the end it extrudes it, and through a hot end with a with a load sensor on it.
Yeah, I think that basically what we probably want to do from now, like going forward, is maybe open up this discussion, and this almost seems like it's a good interplay once we start actually trying to get vendors who are trying to generate this information for their customers.
Yeah.
Trying to work out something with them to be able to figure out how to, because I think a rig is a good idea. Like, there's been people that have done stuff like to do tests, like to measure, like measure how round the filament is and all that kind of stuff. And so I think there's stuff out there, but I think that until we, it's going to need to be something that we're working on with the people that are actually building this. So maybe what we should do is respond to Joshua and say, okay, what would be something useful to make that, to address your pain? Do you need some software that would help you quickly hit a button and walk away, and it would pull the filament in and spit out all your settings? Is that the dream? And then what can we do to help get towards that?
That's my dream with the standard is you put a piece of filament in, it runs a set of tests that it decides is meritable, that we've decided are meritable for the print settings. It comes out with basically a printout that says, hey, this is what our measurement system said is good for these settings, and then it generates a QR code. You put it on your product.
Yeah.
How much plastic is required specifically to test?
I would say less than 300.
What'd you say? What was the question?
Millimeters or grams.
Right.
How much filament is required?
I would say probably less than 300 milligrams are required to test, but it's a lot of man hours. It's not the cost of the filament; it's the cost of the man hours to do.
Well, the reason I asked is because if it's not that much filament, you could have people who were set up as standards type thing, like they've got standard systems of measurement that are expensive to replicate, that the people can send filament in the bags with the testament to be tested if they don't want to test it. Just kind of send it off to somebody that's got the rig.
But the rig, from what we were looking at, What's and I looked at it a while back, but I've been away, MIA for a few months, but the rig.
Me too. It's okay.
In parts, looks like it's not that expensive. It might.
Well,
especially if it's something that we design that is laser cuttable and 3D printable for the most part, except for the electronics and the hot end.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about like atmospheric and locational differences, humidity, stuff like that.
Oh, that's a good point.
But in comparison, everyone's going to have different atmospheric and humidity issues. So measuring it in one single location might help you be able to standardize your offset, but hopefully those don't impact an enormous amount, because your ambient temperature affects your print a huge amount too. So
I think step one is getting a measurement system that works, and then step two will be figuring out how to make it work for everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, but step one, we need to, before we can start pushing it to a ton of vendors, we need to figure out how the measurement methods for these things, because what I consider a reasonable temperature to print at is substantially different than what any of you think, because maybe I like my prints to be fast and have a high, I'd like to have extra, I like to have my extruder a little bit hotter than most people do, because I want things not to jam up or bind up. But maybe somebody else likes it to be cold, so they get really nice bridging. I mean,
I like the smell of burning plastic.
Yeah, there is some personal preference in what you want your print to turn out like, right? I don't think there is a perfect setting. I think there's a group of settings that work better than others, but I don't know. We can move on though. I think we've beaten this horse.
Okay. All right. So resins and powders. So it sounded like Marcin is thinking about potentially, being a seller of these things, and so he was curious from he's a potential vendor. So it would be interesting, to just quickly discuss what the state of the standard is right now for how we handle resins and powders?
Currently, the proper answer is currently we don't handle them. It's not because we don't want to. We have a plan for how we will handle it, but none of the people who have been involved with developing the standard had enough knowledge on printing with them to actually make educated suggestions about what settings are right and what settings are wrong. Like
we don't even know which parameters we need to be tracking.
Yeah,
so basically what we do is we put a flag that says it's filament. If that flag is not set, then it's going to be something else, and we will figure out when we know what to put in the code then, what to put in the code then.
Yeah, it will completely reconstruct a new code that looks exactly the same based upon 1-bit flag. And that 1-bit flag will tell you if you're running resin or chocolate or whatever, what have you, something that is not filament.
Well, that 1-bit flag will tell you if you're printing filament. If it's not filament, then the next bit will tell you, the next few bits will tell you what material it is.
Yeah, because then we will be able to, or we'll have a few bit flag. But that's how we're planning on handling it. But we don't have enough information about those printers, and we don't want to just make this standard forever long. So we'll just switch between. You'll never ever use filament / resin. It won't be that you will never use the same parameters for the same thing. So it doesn't make sense to leave half of them blank, so you just have a ton of zeros.
Yeah.
So real quick,
so
I'm actually working on a powder-based 3D printer. I've got access to a bunch of chemical stuff. I mean, I'm at a university, and I've also got access to a scanning electron microscope, so I'm actually going to be looking at different bonding parameters as well. So by the end of the summer, I should definitely have at least a few good guesses of what makes a good powder and parameters for it.
Well, mainly about what makes a good print with different powders is what we're interested in.
Yeah.
Because it's
and primarily what I'm working.
What the differences are between different powders.
Yeah. Primarily what I'm working on is with gypsum plaster hydroperm, but we're also looking at salt, wood dust, and possibly concrete. But
the other issue with that is you're going to have substantially different printing techniques for each of those, so we will have to come up with... Because the technique that you use to print gypsum will be different than the technique that you use to print powdered plastic. If you're doing SLS or if you're doing whatever the chemical bond or glue bond type printing, or it depends on the type of. Yeah, so it depends on that. So we need to break out different standards for the different print methodologies. And,
all right.
Yeah.
So what might be a good idea is to reach out to like either Maker Juice. He's pretty hacker friendly from what I've heard. The guy who makes Maker Juice, and maybe Marcin, and then Justin. Justin's got some powder printing experience, and just talk, in general, like what this could look like, because I feel like until we actually there's not a ton of resin producers out there right now. There's not a ton of people doing powder printing right now. In the whole not the commercial space, but in the whole maker space.
It hasn't gotten out of hand yet.
It hasn't gotten crazy.
Filament has gone crazy.
So, let's just talk about it. I think we just keep it on the docket, and we can just talk to these vendors and these manufacturers. And so, Justin, do you want to try and talk to Maker Juice, reach out to them, and just talk to them about what we're trying to do, and maybe fill the conversations with? Okay.
But I mean, I can. The thing is, I'm about at the limit of the people that I can talk to and manage right now. There's about 20 people on a list that I'm still. They're in a queue and they keep going around and around.
But so if you do come up with stuff and it is available to open source, because not everything in academic is, but if it is available to open source and to put results in, we can make a section of the community specifically for powder-based whichever type of powder-based printing you're doing. And then once we hit a critical mass of data where we actually have enough information to build a standard, then we can start worrying about how to build it. But we're not going to add on. There is no intention to add powder parameters to the filament section. It will be a new
I understand.
section.
Essentially what you're going to end up having is something where you start reading the barcode, they get the ID version, they hit flags, and after that everything is just depending on the flags.
That's actually exactly how it's set up right now. So.
Yep.
Yeah, which is not a bad way. I like it.
Yeah, but we're not going to add parameters for chocolate or whatever non-thermoplastic non-filaments to the thermoplastic filament section. We will make a new section if we need to.
And that'll completely make sense. What is it, 8 bits or 7 bits right now?
For the version code is 8 bits. The flags is 8 bits, if I'm remembering properly.
So that's like 256, well, 255, give or take, different possibilities.
Yeah, for now. And there is some other things that we're putting in the flags, but in new versions, we can always add more stuff to it with a version change. So we can always add a new version and redo the structure add things to the end and have it search the things at the end to figure out what's happening in the middle.
Yeah.
I would
and
like
all
to
the flags. All the flags that we have now, other than the "this is filament" flag, are things that would be overwritten anyway if we were doing something that wasn't filament. So, like things like composite material, stuff like that, that can be given completely different purposes if it's not filament.
Yeah, and literally that structure that we have built for filament is not at all what we're going to be building for powders or resins, but we need to start focus on one step first. So filaments, because it's out of hand and it's already, we have a large knowledge base on it, that's where we start.
So speaking of filaments that are out of hand, one of the things people want to talk about was like new filaments that have been released, because we've been getting like, there's all the different nylons that have come out. There's also all the different, the bronze embedded or brass embedded. Which one? I can't remember which one.
There's PLA from Color Fab.
Yeah, there's just a ton of stuff coming out. At this point, like I feel like until we kind of have like one finished loop on one material for like this is the UFID tag and now I print with it, it's going to be really hard.
We have that all broken out.
Well, we do, but I'm saying like it's seamless. Like when I can hold up to my computer or hold up to whatever and I can hit print, it's expanding like all the different things. I don't know. And that's just, I'm kind of feeling like we either need to get more people involved that can help with this stuff because I feel like we're a little taxed right now where we are. So that's all. Like, so I don't even want to think about all the new filaments until we actually have what we've already got on the docket taken care of personally.
Note we have settings for. Let me just go to the web page. It's easier for me to figure it out through there because. But we do have everything that I have seen coming out. We either have a mixture code that will make sense for it, and we have material properties that all make sense, including the brass one that we just saw.
Cool.
That is all already built in. It doesn't necessarily mean that we know what is going to be printable with it, but we have all of those things already built in, which is kind of cool because not all of the new nylons have their own category, but a generic nylon category exists. So we have been handling, even with us all being MIA for the, well, not all of us, but most of us being MIA for the last couple of months, our standard is still technically relevant.
Cool. All right. So the only other point, I'm trying to I want to talk briefly about Richard's post, so I'm kind of pushing us through this new filament discussion, is that, Joshua is, E3D is starting their own filament sharing website, filament stuff sharing website. So they're trying to do that. So if anyone can support them, that would be great. I'll take a look at it, see what they're doing. If they're doing everything, if they're doing it all closed, then it makes it more difficult. But
yeah, I asked for
Can some
a
of us
link
link
to
to
at
that?
least see it, but I haven't seen it yet.
And then, okay, so Richard Horn's proposed spool post. I feel like it wasn't really a proposed, well, he did propose a design, I guess, but it was more of a call to arms. So I can't remember, who wanted to talk about this?
He did.
Okay, so
I think we all thought it was a good thing to try to integrate with, if we where we can.
Yeah. So I've talked to Richard a couple times. He's a really fantastic guy, and I have honestly used and abused his website an enormous amount to become a better printer, because he does such fantastic write-ups.
Absolutely.
On everything. So I think that it's a good idea. But I mean, we have talked about spool design before he posted his stuff, and at the time, I think we decided that it was kind of a separate from this project. But you know, I guess with Richard's post, you know, what do we think that we can add anything to that? Like maybe we can propose that you laser engrave the QR code on the cardboard, or you know, I'm just throwing it out there. Like, what do you want to talk about? Who's it? What's this?
Like I mentioned in the thread earlier, I think that we should work with him on that to not only have the inclusion of UFID data included as part of his standard specification, but also a specific position and orientation for that data.
Also,
so that it can be read by an automated reader.
Okay, and are we gonna go back to the whole, like, you know, chip in the spool discussion again?
I still think that's the way to go down the road. I don't think we need to go there immediately.
So do we want to try and put together... Sorry, Cameron, I keep cutting you off. Go ahead.
No worries. Go ahead.
Okay. It's the whole delay with this is like I start talking and then you start talking and then I feel like I cut you off. Okay, so do we feel like we want to just from our community come up with the spool design and say, look, this is at least a design and here's a constraint we'd like to suggest for the broader community to consider as a standard read location, or at least something that makes it easy, like maybe a couple different potential read locations for some type of embedded information?
I've been following. Sorry.
No worries. Go ahead.
It's your turn. Go ahead.
Okay. So, there's in his original write-up, there's two sets of proposals in there. One is for a open source and reasonably inexpensive to produce spool that actually is the spool. The second was an enclosure, but that one was kind of at the end and kind of glossed over. I think we should push for a spot on the side of the spool that we reserve for QR codes outside of being our data passing, just optical data passing. Whether it's I don't know, whether it's just them writing the print parameters on there, or if it's our QR code. I would prefer it to be our QR code, but I want some data on the spool. The second thing is on the cartridge, or on the cartridge that he's proposed as well, to put a spot for a EEPROM. Those are the only two places. Those are the only two places I see that I think we should get into.
Yeah. I agree. You said most of what I was going to say. The one thing I would disagree with is that for the cartridge system, my thought has always been that you would have something that plugs in wherever your filament is taken into the extruder, and that's where the interface for the chip would be.
Okay, so basically like with one of the quick connectors or something like that?
Yeah.
And then you'd run your wire along the PTFE tube or something like that?
Either run a wire along the tube or just have the chip in the end of the tube coming from the enclosure.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking either either the tube would be coming from the printer to the enclosure, and you'd run the wires along the tube coming from the printer, or the other way around. I just didn't know if we were supposed to be pushing every cartridge has its own tube, or if it was every printer has its own tube.
Well, I think what might be useful is to push the idea that make something that like each cartridge, the internals, kind of like what he's got there, is very disposable, and it comes with something that you can it's either read off, so like it's kind of like a pass through from the external, like the exterior of the cartridge. It passes it through to the other system, or it comes with something that you can, that comes in the bag and you just plug it in, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
I hate lag. I've been working with the Uprint systems, and what they do for it, the Stratasys systems, and what they have is either red or black for support, red for material, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they have a 4-pin system. I think 2 of them, I haven't done an analyzer on it, but I think 2 of them are for the tiny little micro switch they have in there, micro in-stop, that just says it's the filament still there, and if it's not, then they're like, oh, we've run out. The other side is NEBROM.
Yeah, I have experimented with those. I've got a couple that couple of empty ones that somebody gave me, and there are 4 pins. Only, if I remember correctly, only 3 of them are actually hooked up to anything. One there's a ground pin, 1 pin that hooks to ground, or one pin is for the switch that tells you if there's filament present, and the other is one-wire data and power in one pin.
So how much would it cost for manufacturers to have just some kind of standardized little plug that people could have on the end of the filament that they would just plug into their extruder that would have all the info as well?
Theoretically, not much. It depends on what kind of connector it ends up being.
Yeah, the cost is going to be in the electronics. It's going to be in the connector and in the assembly manufacturing. That's going to be 90% of the cost. So it depends upon how we or whoever we farm out the design to actually goes about making it.
And the other side of that is if you sell them. Sorry.
No worries.
If you sell them separately, like 1.753 mil, give or take, just 2 standard versions really, and people can plug them in via USB or something to their computer or smartphone or whatever, and basically download their current spool's data from the QR code onto that little chip, and then hook it up to their filament, plug it into their firmware or whatever. The manufacturers don't have to make it. You still have filament detection. You have all the data on there.
So my thoughts are, if we're going to, our plan is already to try to do something with the slicers. In the firmware, I think we should put an M command that basically is write the filament data to the cartridge, and then when you plug it into your printer, the first print that you run with that spool attached will download the data into that spool if it's not already there, and if it is already there, it'll pull it out.
Well, when you put the idea is that the chips and the cartridges themselves, if they're cartridges, should be reusable. So when you empty one, you put a new spool in there, and if the spools are standardized, that becomes a lot easier. And then when you put the spool in there, you use your webcam to read the QR code and write that data to the EEPROM when you do that, so that from now on, until that spool is empty and you put a different spool in there, that cartridge has its UFID data on the EEPROM.
And that can be done through the firmware. You don't actually have to have any third-party anything. It can be done at any. It could be done on any home printer. So, if you had a spool that you wanted to turn into a UFID spool, you would just need to find a UFID cartridge, basically. and send the settings. That's the concept. But we got some baby steps to take before we get there.
Yeah.
And by putting the chip on a thing that the filament goes through on its way in, the cartridge actually isn't entirely necessary. There are other reasons you want to have a cartridge, but you could use a thing that just rides the filament and plugs in where the filament goes into the machine, similar to the way I think the Uprint ones do.
Well, I was talking to Nicholas Seward, for example. He was working on several different aspects of this. For those you don't know, he's the one who did the second place winner of the Gator Prize, several different printers. He actually lives in Arkansas, so that's interesting. He doesn't live too far away from me. I talked to him about doing certain things, and he was talking about kind of like an MRI machine, but that basically as the filament goes in, does a cross-section and sends data of that to the firmware and tells about it. So that way not only does it detect the consistency, the size, and the basic presence of the material, it can detect a few other stats too. But
those are things that we've considered. Basically, the idea that we have for supporting something like that is to, instead of having a dumb EEPROM on that chip, instead have a microcontroller there that can emulate the EEPROM, but it has some flags that it sends that lets the printer know that it needs to pull that data periodically because it's going to be changing. Because it has some kind of mechanism for measuring on the fly.
But until we get to a point where we're actually able to have one or the other work, we'll just assume that whichever one we get working first is the one that's going to be happening in firmware, and whichever one we get working second, we'll have to install a flag for.
Yep. All right. Well, I want to go ahead and just kind of wrap this up, because we could talk about implementation to the end of the world.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say, do we want to write in response to the 3D printing industry a blog post, and maybe even try and talk to Niles or Richard and see if we can maybe get them to write about us, and to either do both for twofold, get our ideas about a cartridge out there, and also get more information, more people to know about what we're trying to do with this spec, so that we can get more people involved.
The other side of it is, I know you are working on the on your printer side as well, but we might want to get more firmware or hardware makers as well from that side at some point, once we get to support the hardware implementation aspect, if we can. I don't know who would be available, but if we can get more people involved, it'd be better than if we have less people involved.
Yeah, that's a huge field right now, and there's so many different people all doing their own thing that until we really have something solid to offer them, it's kind of
up in the air,
spitting into the wind.
Yeah.
It's kind of like asking people to work on an open source project.
Oh, really? That's not difficult, is it?
It just you accept the joy that comes into your life with open source, and you just move forward. And you do what you can, and so I do what I can for the open source stuff that I do. I do as much as I possibly can, and I feel good about that. It's not awesome, but it is what it is. So that's why you usually end up having, it's the classic comic of what people think open source is versus what open source really is. And so there's a comic of a whole bunch of people standing around holding papers and talking and pointing and drawing on a whiteboard is what people think open source is, and what it really is some guy in his basement, in the middle of the night typing code because he's trying to scratch an itch for himself. But
I think, all in all, I think we are getting closer than we were. We are definitely. We didn't do anything fancy for it, but we did on May 6th pass the 1-year mark of owning a domain name at least, and
cool.
renewed for the next 2 years at least. We're paid up. So we are 1 year old, and we are much closer this year than we were last year. So that's
cool. Well, before we wrap up, are you guys okay if I reach out to Niles and maybe try and get some blog post on the 3D printing industry or something, just trying to get us, some of these thoughts. Maybe I'll write it up in a Google Doc and share it with you guys, and then we can group edit it.
Yeah.
One other thing,
like a good idea.
Besides the blog post, would be probably reaching out to RepRap Magazine.
Yeah, we can talk
about it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so I just want to ask, Robert, what? Did you have something to say, Cameron?
No, it's Robert's turn.
I was just going to ask, for the people that have joined that have not had a chance to talk yet, is there anything that you'd like to, is there anything we can answer, or have you just enjoyed the, the craziness that's passed by you for the last hour?
Are you reading me?
I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So I was just trying to say something before the end of the meeting that I do want to. I'll take this offline and to the Hangout or the Google Plus page. But a really good thing for a blog post might be a workflow example that shows people who don't get it a graphic. Get through your network and find someone who can just draw up a graphic that describes how this would be used in a use case scenario. It makes things clearer. I actually drew one up during this meeting, and I'll try to transfer it over to the site. It'll show you what I think of it coming in as a newer person who doesn't really get what you get in your whole vision, and maybe you can fix some errors that might come up in the blog post. So if you go through just block of text, it might not be as nice or as popular as getting a little picture there that describes this workflow.
Absolutely, cool. And I would love to see it, because if I draw a picture, it will exclude everything that's important.
Cool. And then I don't know, did David have anything did you want to say, or since he's here, but
I think he's just listening.
All right. No,
catch him on IRC.
That's good enough for me. I'll look for him on IRC. I'm a Savory Watt on IRC for those who care. I lurk
Freenode?
Freenode. I lurk in the RepRap and the SmoothieWare, and I occasionally drop in other ones. All right. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. For joining tonight and sharing ideas. I felt like we had a lot of really good progress. I'm happy that we're all, have taken a little bit of a recharge, and some people have, gone nuts. And this is awesome. So I will try and put together the next meeting and hopefully have it be at a better time for the EU people. So if you can join, that's great. If not, then you can watch it on YouTube. All right. We good?
Yep.
All right. All of y'all have a good night. Justin, I'll ping you.